For the space of one more breath, no one in the hollow was looking at her, and Elsbeth meant to keep it so. She stood in the shadow of the far pillar with a water jug against her hip, a kitchen girl sent down to keep the augur's cups filled, and she counted the torches the way she counted everything when she was afraid. 9 along the curved wall, 9, and then the black mouth of the stair, and then the sky. She could not see, but could feel turning above the keep of Ashenreach like a slow wheel. The moon would rise within the hour. After that, she must be behind a bolted door, or she would be dead, and she had spent the whole of her life making certain she reached the door in time. In the center of the hollow stood the Seven Stone. It was older than the keep, older than the kingdom of Hollandmark itself, a slab of pale rock the height of a man with 7 marks cut deep across its face. 6 of the marks she could name, for every child in the scullery could name them. The 7th had been worn smooth to nothing, long before her grandmother's grandmother drew breath, and no one living knew what sign had stood there, only that it was gone, and that because it was gone, the stone had slept for 100 years. They had come to wake it anyway, 12 of them, the finest wolves of the realm, and she had watched every one of them fail. One by one, the great lords laid a hand upon the 7 stone and bid it know them, and one by one, the marks lay dark under their palms. A border lord tried until the veins stood out in his neck. A silver captain struck the stone with the flat of his sword when it would not answer, and Elder Ormond, the gray-robed keeper of the right, only looked at him with tired eyes until he stepped back ashamed. Now the last of them stood before it, Crown Prince Leoric, gold to the roots of his hair, so certain of himself that he smiled while he laid his hand where all the others had lain. "Wake," he told the stone, the way a man tells a hound to sit. Nothing. The hollow was very quiet. Leoric took his hand away as though the stone had insulted him. Elder Ormond drew breath to speak the rite closed for another year, and the whole cold weight of the failure settled over the crowd, and someone would have to carry the blame of it, and their eyes began to move. That was when the press of bodies shifted. A lord stepped back from the stone and trod hard on the hem of Elspeth's skirt, and she went down. She caught herself against nothing. The jug flew from her hands. She heard it break somewhere far away, and she felt the wet stone rushing up to meet her, and then she did not strike it, because a hand closed around her arm, and another spread flat against her back, and held her whole weight in the air, as though she weighed nothing at all. She looked up into a face she did not know, a big man scarred through one cheek, dark and still, standing where no one else had dared to stand, at the very foot of the 7 stone. His eyes were the gray of rain. "I have you," he said low, only for her. But her torn glove had come away in his grip, and her bare right hand flung out to save herself had already found the stone. Under her palm, the 6 marks she could name woke all at once, burning white. And then, slowly, like a coal breathed back to life, the 7th mark, the forgotten one, the sign that had been nothing at all for 100 years, filled itself in beneath her fingers and blazed. All 7 signs of the 7 stone were shining. The whole hollow had turned to look at the kitchen girl, and into that terrible silence, Crown Prince Leoric said, in a voice gone white with fury, "No." They took her up out of the hollow and into the augur's antechamber, and Elspeth went with her hands folded so that no one would see them shake. It was a small stone room, and it filled quickly. Crown Prince Leoric came first, still white about the mouth. Behind him came Elder Ormond, and behind Ormond came a woman Elspeth had seen only at a distance in all her years, at Ashenreach, the High Augur Morwenna, who read the moon for the crown and whose word in any matter of the right was law. She was neither young nor old. She had a still, clever face, and she looked at Elspeth once, quickly, the way a woman looks at a debt she had thought long paid. Old Dillis shoved in at the door and would not be turned back. She came and stood at Elspeth's shoulder, breathing hard, her flour-dusted hands closing over Elspeth's arm, and for that one small warmth Elspeth could have wept. Elder Ormond spoke first, because someone had to. "The stone has woken," he said. "It has not woken in 100 years. This is not a small thing, Your Highness. She who wakes the 7 stone is stone chosen. And the stone chosen weds the crown, so that the moon's blessing may sit beside the throne. It is the oldest law we keep." For a moment no one answered him. Then Leoric laughed, and it was an ugly sound. "You would have me wed that," he said. He did not so much as look at her while he said it. He looked at Ormond, and at Morwenna, as though the two of them had played a poor joke on him. "I have stood before half the great houses of Hullenmark tonight. I have let them watch me fail at a rock, and now you would set a scullery girl, who stinks of onions, at my side, and put my mother's crown upon her head, so the whole realm may laugh at me twice over." "She woke the stone, Your Highness," Ormond said quietly. "You did not." The words landed, and Elspeth watched them land. Leoric's handsome face went from red to something colder, and she understood all at once that here was a man who had never in his life been told he had failed at anything, and that he would never forgive the room that told him now. "I refuse the match," he said. "Write it in your books, however you please. Let her keep her stone. I keep my name and my place, and I will find myself a blessing that does not come to me with dishwater on its hands." "You cannot simply cast aside the law of the right," Ormond began. "I can," said Leoric, "and I do." "Then hear what you cast aside along with her," Ormond said, and his voice had lost its patience at last. "A rain the stone will not bless is a rain the great houses need not follow. Half of them stood in that hollow tonight, and watched the rock lie dark beneath your hand. You would be wise not to hand them a second cause to whisper." But Leoric had already half turned away, and a man who will not hear does not hear. The silence after was worse than the shouting had been. Elspeth felt every eye in the room settle on her, and slide away again, as though she were something spilled that no one wished to be the first to touch. She lifted her chin. She did not know where the voice came from, but it came out steady. "Your Highness has refused me," she said, "and I find I am glad of it. I would not take a husband who could speak of me so and still call himself a prince." Leoric stared at her, as though a stool had spoken. It was Morwenna who moved then. She had said nothing all this while. Now she crossed to the mouth of the antechamber, and looked back through it at the pale rock still faintly glowing in the dark of the hollow. And when at last she spoke, her voice was smooth and cool as poured milk. "The stone has waked for a kitchen girl," she said, half to herself. 7 signs. All 7 of them. She turned. "That has not been seen since the 7 kin were put out of the world, and the 7 kin have been gone 100 years and more." She smiled, and the smile did not reach her eyes. "How fortunate for us all that they are gone," she said. "It would be a grave thing indeed, would it not, if any drop of that blood had lived?" Something in the way she said it made the hair rise along Elspeth's arms. "But the law does not care who refuses whom," Morwenna went on, turning back to the prince, almost gentle now. "The stone chosen must stand beside the crown. If the heir will not wed her, then the law names another who must in the crown's stead." She let the quiet stretch out thin. "There is still a warden of the stone, is there not?" And every head in the room turned toward the scarred man in the doorway, the one who had caught a falling girl, the disgraced one whose house had been unmade a generation ago, and whose name had not been spoken aloud in that keep in more than 20 years. His name was Drosten. Elspeth learned it that same night, in the way one learned things at Ashenreach, which was from Dilly's, in a fierce whisper, while the old woman worked the tangles from her hair with hands that would not be still. He was the warden of the stone, Dilly's said, or he had been born to be, before the crown took the wardenship from his house, and struck their name from the rolls, and stripped away the old signs they had carried, so they should bear no mark and hold no rank ever after. The unmarked folk called them then, when they spoke of them at all. There had been a great many of them once. Now there was only the one, a soldier who kept to the cold end of the keep and troubled no one, and whom no one troubled, until tonight. He had agreed within the hour. Elder Ormond had put the old clause to him plainly, before them all. The stone chosen cannot stand alone, he had said. The heir has refused her. By the law, you know better than any man living. Warden, the duty falls now to you. Will you take it? Elspeth had watched him weigh it. He was not a man whose face gave much away, but she saw him look at her once, at the shaking girl in the onion-stained apron, whom a prince had just thrown away before the whole court, and she saw something move behind the grey of his eyes that was not quite pity, and was gentler than pity, and for which she had no name. I will, he had said. So they were married before the moon rose, which was a mercy Elspeth did not think a soul among them understood, but her. It was nothing like the rite in the hollow. A scant handful of witnesses in a narrow chapel, a tired priest, no crowd and no gold. Dillis wept the whole way through it. Morwenna did not come. Andrasten stood beside Elspeth and spoke the words in his low, even voice, and when the moment came to look at her and swear it, he looked at her, full and steady, and did not once let his eyes slide away, as every other eye in that keep had slid away all night. She counted it, in the ledger she kept in her chest, of small mercies and large cruelties. She set it down on the side that had almost nothing on it. When it was done, he did not reach for her hand. He drew his own dark cloak from his shoulders instead, and settled it about hers, so the hood came down over her face. And he walked her out across the yard, past the servants who had come to gape, close enough that his shoulders stood as a wall between her and their staring, and far enough that he never once presumed to touch her. At the door of the rooms they had given her, high and cold, and hers alone, he stopped. "My lady," he said, and the word sat strangely upon a kitchen girl. "You have had a cruel day, and I do not mean to make it crueler. The wardenship keeps me at the stone through the dark hours. That is my duty, and always has been, and it need not become yours. You may keep these rooms and your own hours and your own company, and no one will come to this door whom you do not bid come." He paused, "Least of all me." Her throat was tight. "Thank you," she managed. "You owe me no thanks for it," he said, and she would learn in time that he said some form of this each time he had done something kind, as though kindness were a debt he was ashamed to be caught paying. Then he bowed his scarred head to her, and he was gone down the stair, toward the hollow and the stone, to keep his cold watch alone. Elspeth shut the door. She bolted it. She leaned her back against the wood, and let out a breath it felt she had been holding since the jug first left her hands. And then, through the high window, the first white edge of the moon rose over the wall of Aschenreich, and it began. It always began the same way, a warmth low in her hands and along her arms, a prickling beneath the skin like a limb waking from sleep. She no longer fought it. She had learned long ago there was no use in fighting it. She only crossed to the glass in the dark and made herself watch, because Dillis had told her when she was small and weeping that a thing you will not look at comes to own you, and a thing you look at every night you may in time learn to carry. In the glass, one by one, the marks rose to the surface of her skin. 6 of them she knew as well as she knew her own name. And the 7th, the one on the flat of her right palm, the one Dillis had bound in cloth when she was a babe, and taught her to keep gloved and closed and hidden from every living eye, rose last, and gave off its own faint light in the dark. Elspeth stood very still, and looked at it, and felt the floor of her whole life tilt beneath her, because she had seen that sign once already tonight. She had watched it fill itself in on the face of the 7 stone beneath her bare hand. The 7th sign. The forgotten one. The sign the whole realm believed had been lost for 100 years. It was not lost. It had never been lost. She had been carrying it on her hand the length of her whole life, and she did not know what it meant, and she did not know what she was, and now a hollow, full of the greatest wolves in Hollandmark, had watched it burn. Far below her, in the dark, a scarred man was keeping watch over a stone that had just told the whole world her oldest secret in a language not one of them, herself least of all, knew how to read. The court received her the next morning, and Elspeth learned that a room could be crueler with its silence than the prince had been with all his words. She stood at the foot of the high table, in a gown Dilys had found for her, too fine and a little too large, and she let them look. The great houses of Hollenmark filed past to make their bows to the stone chosen. And every bow was correct, and not one of them was kind. She heard the whispers as she was meant to hear them, pitched to carry. That was the girl who had waked the stone. The prince could not. That was the kitchen rag, who had shamed the heir before the whole realm. Some of them had built their lives around Leoric's favor, and here was a scullion in his place at the moon's own table, and they would forgive her for it no sooner than he would. She kept her chin level and her hands still, and answered what little was asked of her. She had learned long ago that stillness was a kind of armor, and that a face which gives nothing back starves the people who feed on it. Only 2 people in that hall looked at her as though she were a woman, and not a scandal. One was Dilys, hovering by the servant's door with her heart in her eyes. The other was the warden, who stood apart at the cold end of the room as he stood apart everywhere, and who watched the whispering lords with a look she could not read, though she thought, had she been made to name it, she would have called it contempt held on a very short leash. It was Elder Ormond who came to her when the reception thinned, and who told her the thing that turned her blood to water. "The stone chosen keeps the vigil," he said gently, as though it were good news. "From the waking of the stone until the high moon, the chosen sits with the warden at the 7th stone, through the dark hours, so that the moon may come to know the one it has named. It is 9 nights. It is the oldest custom of the rite, and it cannot be set aside. 9 nights. 9 nights at the stone, in the dark when the moon was up and her sigils were out, and the one man in the world she most needed to keep her secret from would be sitting an arm's length away." Elspeth said that she understood and went away, and was quietly sick. That night she went down to the hollow, with her whole plan resting on a single thing, which was the dark. She wore the deepest hood she owned and a pair of Dilys's old kitchen gloves, and she took the seat on the far side of the 7th stone, where the torchlight did not reach, and she kept the great pale bulk of the stone between herself and the warden, the way a swimmer keeps a spar between herself and the deep. If he thought it strange that his wife would not sit beside him, he did not say so. He only inclined his scarred head, and let her have the dark she wanted, and asked nothing at all. For a long while neither of them spoke. The stone was cold beneath her gloved hands. Above them the moon moved, and she felt the sigils wake and rise along her arms beneath her sleeves, and she held herself very still and was grateful past speaking for the shadow. "You need not sit so far," he said at last, out of the dark on the other side of the stone. His voice was low and even, and carried no demand in it. "I only mean, the night is long, and the stone is poor conversation. You may draw nearer the light, if you are cold. I will keep my eyes to myself, if that is your worry." "It is not that," she said too quickly. "Then it is something," he said, but not unkindly, "and let it go." And she liked him a little for the letting go, though she did not yet know that was the word she was reaching for. They talked, after that, in the careful way of 2 people learning where the floor lies in a dark room. He asked her nothing. She could not answer. She found she could tell him of the kitchens of Dilys, of the small kingdom of the scullery and its wars, and he listened as though a scullery were as fit a subject as a throne. Once she caught herself laughing, low, at some small war of the pot-room she was recounting, and she heard him make a sound in the dark that she thought might be the beginning of a laugh in a man who had long forgotten how, and it startled them both into silence. "Forgive me," he said gravely. "I am out of practice." She found she was smiling into the dark where he could not see it, and that the smile did not hurt her at all. When she asked him, greatly daring, what a warden did, through 9 nights at a stone that only slept, he was quiet a while, and then said, "He keeps it company. Everyone forgets the stone was here before any of us. It has been alone a great while. Someone ought to sit with it." Elspeth looked at the pale rock between them in the dark, and understood that he had told her something of himself and dressed it as a thing about the stone, and she said nothing and let him keep the pretense, because he had let her keep hers. When at last he judged the hour safe, and said she might go and rest, she rose too quickly, stiff from stillness, and put out a hand to the stone to steady herself, and her gloved fingers came down over his, where his hand lay on the cold rock. And, beneath the wool of the glove, on the flat of her hidden palm, the seventh sigil woke, and gave a single pulse of light, warm and sudden and bright enough that a thin line of it escaped the glove's edge and lit the dark between their two hands. The warden went very still. "What," he said softly, "was that?" She snatched her hand back and told him it was nothing, a trick of the torches, and she was up the stair before he could rise, her heart slamming, the glove pressed flat to her chest as though she might push the light back into her palm. He did not follow. That was the mercy of him, and the danger of him both. A lesser man would have chased her and demanded, and a demand she could have outrun. But the warden only let her go and kept whatever he had seen, and the next night, when she came down to the hollow, he did not ask again. He had simply moved the nearer torch away before she arrived, so that the dark on her side of the stone lay deeper than it had the night before. He did it without a word, as though a draught had done it, and Elspeth understood that he had decided her secret was hers to keep, and had set about helping her keep it without once asking what it was. That undid her more than any cruelty could have. The cruelty she had in plenty. By day the court had found its feet again, and having a scullion to despise, had put them all in better humor. A lady let a fan drop so that Elspeth must stoop for it, and be a servant again before them all. A young lord asked her loudly whether the moon had told her which fork to use. She let it wash over her, and gave them nothing. And every evening, she carried the day's small wounds down to the stone, and set them quietly aside, and did not speak of them, and did not need to, for the warden always seemed to know the shape of her day by the set of her shoulders, though how he knew it, she could not have said. Once, and only once, the mockery went too far. A lord, deep in his cups, blocked her path in the great gallery, and asked, to the delight of his fellows, whether she meant to go and bless his boots, next, since a scullion was surely fitter for his floors than for the moon's own table. The laughter had not yet finished leaving his mouth when it stopped, for the warden was there. He had crossed the gallery without a sound, and he did not raise his voice, for he never raised his voice. He only set himself between the lord and Elspeth, and looked at the man and said quietly, "She is my wife. The next word you spend on her, you will answer to me for, and you will not enjoy the reckoning." Whatever the unmarked had lost, the memory of what they had once been ran long in that keep, and none there wished to discover whether the warden's teeth had been struck from him along with his name. He said no more. None of them did. That night, it was Morwenna who sharpened the whole thing to a point. The high augur summoned the court to the hollow on the fourth day, and stood before the seven stone, with the seven signs cold, under the grey morning, and told them what the old rite required. Elspeth had not known it. She saw, watching Morwenna's still clever face, that she had been meant not to know it. "The stone has named a chosen," Morwenna said in her smooth poured voice, "but a name is not a proof. On the night of the high moon, the chosen shall stand at the seven stone before this court and be read. The stone will show us the truth of her, whatever that truth should prove to be. So it has always been. So it must be, for a blessing the realm can trust cannot be a blessing taken on faith alone." A murmur went round the hollow. Elspeth stood very still in the middle of it, and felt the trap close over her without a sound. To stand at the stone at the high moon, under the fullest and cruelest moon of the year, when her sigils would burn at their very brightest before the whole assembled court, and let them see whatever the stone chose to show. There would be no hood there would be no deep and merciful dark. There would be only the 7 signs upon the stone and the 7 signs upon her skin, and a court that had already decided to despise her, and Morwenna watching to see which truth rose up. She could not do it. And she could not refuse it either, for to refuse the reading was to forfeit the stone, and to forfeit the stone was to hand the realm its reason to say the maid had been false, and the false must be dealt with. That night, Dilys came to her rooms, gray-faced, and would not sit. Someone had been asking in the kitchens. She said, a man of the high augurs. He wished to know Elspeth's habits. When she rose, when she slept, whether she kept a light burning, whether she was ever troubled in the dark. Dilys had sent him off with a flea in his ear, but her hands shook in the telling. They watch you now, child, she whispered. Especially at moonrise. You must be careful past all carefulness. You must not let the moon catch you where an eye can follow. Elspeth took the old woman's shaking hands in her own gloved ones and held them, and did not say what she was thinking, which was that the moon caught her every single night of her life, and that in 5 nights it would catch her before the whole of the world. That night at the stone, she could not keep the fear out of her, try as she might, and the warden felt the shape of it in her silence. He did not ask what Morwenna had laid upon her. He only said, out of the dark, you are not alone at this stone, whatever they have told you above. Whatever comes at the high moon, you will not stand at it by yourself. It was a small thing, and it changed nothing, and she held on to it anyway, the way a drowning hand holds a reed. 5 nights to the high moon, below, in the dark, the stone was waiting. And so, she was beginning to fear, was the woman who read it. The day before she found it, she had gone down to the kitchens to be near the one warmth left to her, and had found Dilys at the long table with her hands deep in the bread, and had asked her the thing she had never once dared to ask in the whole of her life. Where did I come from? She said. Whose child am I, that I should carry these? And what does the one on my hand mean? That is not like the other 6. Dilys's hands went still in the dough. For a long moment, she did not turn round. When she did, her face had shut like a door. Not that, child, she said. Do not ask me that. Not here, not where these walls can carry it. When it is safe, if ever it is safe, I will tell you the whole of it, and you will wish that I had not. Now put it away. And she would say no more, and Elspeth had gone away, no wiser, and far more afraid, carrying the shape of a truth she was not yet allowed to hold. She found the first of it by accident, 3 nights before the high moon, in the long gallery above the hollow. She had gone up to be alone, which was the only company the keep would give her freely, and she had stopped in the dark of the gallery because there were voices below her at the turn of the stair, and one of them was laughing. She knew the laugh. It was lyric. A lady laughed with him, low and pleased, a slim gold-haired woman with the high augur's own coloring. And she stood near the prince in a way that told its own tale. You are certain of it, the lady was saying. Morwenna is certain of it, said Leoric. And Morwenna is never wrong about the stone. The reading will show the court what the creature truly is. He said the word creature, the way another man might say the word vermin. And once it has, no one will ever speak again of a blessing that wants a scullion in the crown. The stone can be read clean, the augur says. A false chosen may be set aside and a true one named in her place. He touched the lady's cheek, a true one who was born to it. And the warden, the lady said. He has wed her. A thing on paper, said Leoric carelessly. Wed to a false chosen who is put aside. There is no marriage there worth the name. He will be glad enough to be free of her, I should think, once he sees what she is. He is a cold creature himself. He never wanted her. He only did his tiresome duty, as he always does. They went on down the stair, and their voices went with them, and Elspeth stood with her back to the cold wall and made herself breathe. They meant to destroy her at the reading. She had known it was a trap. She had not known they had already chosen the woman who would stand in her place. Nor, that they spoke of her death as lightly as of a dropped fan. A false chosen may be set aside. She knew what setting aside meant for a thing the stone had shown to be unnatural. She had known it since she was a child, since Dillis first bound her palm and told her, weeping, that a sign once seen was a life once ended. She might have wept then, alone in the gallery, but she had wept out most of her weeping long ago, and what came in its place was a cold and level fear. And then, because the night was not yet finished being cruel to her, she heard the second thing. She had taken the back way toward her rooms, past the door of the warden's own bare chamber, and the door stood not quite closed, and Morwenna's voice came through the gap soft as falling ash. "Your house was old before mine was dreamed of," the High Augur was saying. "Warden of the Stone, it is a proud name to have carried in silence all these years. A proud name to have watched, struck from every roll, and stripped from your own house. She let it sit. It could be given back. The rolls could be mended. Your father's name could be spoken aloud in this keep once more, and yours after it. And the mark of your disgrace could be named a wrong the crown repents of, all of it. It wants only that you not stand in the way of the reading, that you let the stone speak, and the law take its course, and the girl go where false chosen go." There was a silence. Elspeth stood frozen at the edge of the door, with her whole heart hung upon that silence. She heard the warden say, in his low, even voice, and it seemed to reach her from very far away, "You give me until the high moon to answer." "I give you until the high moon," said Morwenna, pleased. Elspeth did not wait to hear more. She could not. She turned and went down the passage on silent feet, and up the stair and into her cold, high rooms, and she bolted the door and stood in the dark, with her hand pressed hard to her mouth. He had not said no. The one man in all of Hollenmark who had shown her a single kindness, who had moved a torch to keep her secret, who had given her the dark to hide in, had been offered back his father's name and his stolen honor, and the mending of the oldest wound he carried, and the whole price of it was only that he stand aside and let her die. And he had not said no, he had asked for time. Of course he had, she told herself, with a bitterness that frightened her. Of course he had. What was she to him but a duty, and a stranger, and a scullion in a borrowed gown? What was she against his father's name? Behind her, the moon cleared the wall, and the 7 sigils rose along her arms and shone in the dark of the empty room, and there was no one to hide them from, and Elspeth found she could no longer even bring herself to care. The day before the high moon, Elspeth made herself a cold and level plan, because a plan was the only thing she had left that no one could take from her. They meant to name her a false chosen and set her aside, and she had learned, lying awake, that there was one kind of setting aside the law did not easily allow. A marriage on paper could be undone. A marriage made whole and true, witnessed and real, could not. If she were truly the warden's wife, in every way a wife could be, then she was not a thing put by at an augur's word. It would not save her from the reading, but it might make her harder to erase, and being hard to erase was the only power she had ever held. That was the reason she gave herself. It was not the whole of the reason, and she knew it was not, because when she thought of going to him her face grew warm, and the warmth had nothing to do with the law. She did not let herself think too long, for thinking was the enemy of doing, and she had learned that lesson at a great many sinks full of cold water. She washed her face. She unbraided her hair and braided it again, with hands that would not quite keep still. She told herself that a woman who could stand at a reading and let a court watch her burn could surely knock upon one quiet door, and she almost believed it. She went to his bare chamber in the last of the afternoon light, while the sun was still up, and her skin was still her own, and no sigil could betray her. He was standing at the narrow window when she came in, and he turned, and something in her face made him go still. "My lady," he said. "I have thought about the reading," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "I have thought about what they mean to do to me. And I think if our marriage were a true one, they could not so easily call it nothing. She made herself hold his eyes. I am asking you to make it a true one. Tonight. Before they take that from me too. For a long moment, he did not move at all. Then he crossed the room to her, and he lifted one scarred hand as though he would touch her face, and stopped, a breath away, and did not. And she saw the wanting in him plain and unhidden, for one instant, before he closed it away. No, he said quietly. The word went through her like cold water. Not like this, he said. Not with a blade hung over you, and a court baying for the morning. Not when you come to me out of fear and call it a plan. You do not owe me this. You will never owe me this. He stepped back, and the space he put between them was worse than any blow. You will not buy your way through this with yourself, whatever the morning brings. I will not have it. Elspeth stood very still, and into the quiet, all of it came flooding, everything she had overheard 3 nights before at his cracked door. Morwenna's voice, soft as ash. Your father's name could be spoken aloud again. And his own, in the dark, giving no refusal. You give me, until the high moon to answer. Of course, she thought, of course he would not make it true. A true marriage he could not undo, and he meant to undo it. He was keeping himself free. He had been offered his father's name and his stolen honor, and the price was only her, and he had asked for time to think. And now he stood there refusing to bind himself to a woman he intended to let die, and dressing it, as he dressed everything, as a kindness. Every kindness he had ever shown her turned, in that moment, to something colder in her sight. The torch moved aside in the dark. Had not been tenderness, she told herself. It had been a man keeping a useful thing hidden until he had done with it. The dark he gave her had not been mercy, it had been distance. He had never once let her close because he had never once meant to keep her, and she had been fool enough, and lonely enough, to warm her cold hands at the small fires of a man who was only waiting for the moon to burn her down. I understand, she said, and her voice did not shake, and she was proud of that, later, when there was little else to be proud of. Forgive me, I should not have come, Elspeth, he said. But she was already at the door, and she did not turn, because if she turned, he would see her face, and she had given that man enough. She had given him the truth of her fear, and the offer of herself, and he had handed both back to her folded neat, the way a man returns a thing he has no use for. She went up to her cold, high rooms, and she did not weep, because weeping was a thing you did when there was still something to be saved. That night, the moon was not yet full, and she sat the last vigil alone, for she could not make herself go down to the stone and sit in the dark beside him and pretend. Let him keep his stone company. Let him keep his father's name. She would keep her own counsel, as she had kept it the whole of her life, and tomorrow she would stand at the reading and let the world see exactly what she was, and at least, at the very last, there would be an end to hiding. She spent that last day as a condemned woman spends one, which is to say slowly, and noticing everything. The way the light moved across the floor of her cold high room. The sound of the kitchens, far below, where she had once been safe, and no one a whole life ago and a week ago both. She thought of Dillis, and hoped the old woman would not be made to watch. She thought of her own unknown mother, whoever she had been, and wondered whether she had been afraid at the end, and whether she had been alone. The next evening, the high moon rose, huge and white and pitiless, over the wall of Ashen Reach, and they came for her. They brought her down into the hollow in a gown of plain grey, which Morwenna had chosen for her, she understood, so that she would look like what they meant to prove her, a servant playing at a blessing. The court had come in its full number, ringed around the 7 stone in the torchlight, and above the open eye of the hollow, the high moon hung so bright it threw shadows across the floor. Leoric stood among the great houses, with the gold-haired lady at his side. Elder Ormond stood at the stone, grey and unhappy, and Morwenna waited beside the 7 stone in her augur's white, serene as still water, and when Elspeth was brought to her she smiled a small smile that did not reach her eyes, and said, softly, so that only Elspeth could hear, "Let us see you, then." The warden was there. Elspeth saw him at the edge of the ring, standing apart as he always stood, his scarred face unreadable in the moonlight. She looked away from him. She had no room left in her for what he was. "Come," said Morwenna to the court, lifting her voice. "The stone has named this woman. Chosen. Let the stone now show us whether it named truly. Let it show us what she is." And she took Elspeth by the wrist, not ungently, and drew her bare hand to the face of the seven stone, and pressed it there, palm flat, under the full and terrible light of the high moon. There was no hiding it now. There was no hood, no merciful dark, no torch quietly moved aside. The moon took her. It came the way it always came, the warmth and the prickling rush, but faster now and fiercer under that vast white light. And the seven sigils rose along her bare arms and burned, and on the flat of her palm against the stone the seventh sign woke and blazed, and on the face of the seven stone beneath her hand all seven signs answered and blazed with her. So that stone and woman shone together with one light in the dark of the hollow. The court cried out as one. Someone screamed the old word, the one Dillies had spent a lifetime teaching her to fear, Sevenkin. Half the ring surged back from her, half surged forward. Leoric had gone white to the lips. The gold-haired lady had a hand pressed to her mouth. All around the ring the great lords who had bowed so correctly and jeered so quietly stared at the shining girl and the shining stone as though the ground had opened beneath them. For every child of Hullenmark was raised on the tale of the cursed Sevenkin, and not one of them had ever thought to see the tales stand up in a grey gown and look back at them with a human face. And Morwenna, who had waited a lifetime for this, lifted her hand, and in her hand was a small pale vessel of moonglass, and she said, in a voice pitched for the whole court to hear, "The stone is defiled. This is no blessing. This is the cursed blood the crown cast out 100 years ago, come creeping back in a scullion's skin, and the moon that named her false shall be the moon that judges her." She dashed the moonglass against the seven stone at Elspeth's feet. Where it broke, a cold white fire leapt up off the stone, moon caustic, the augur's own cruel craft, a light that burned as no honest fire burns. It sprang straight for Elspeth's shining face, and she had time only to understand that she was going to die, and to be, in some strange, far corner of herself, almost glad that the hiding was finally over. She never felt it. Because the warden was there, he crossed the ring in the space of a single heartbeat, faster than a big man had any right to move, and he put himself between Elspeth and the white fire, and he took it full across the eyes. He did not cry out. That was the thing she would carry longest. He made no sound at all. He only staggered as the cold fire broke over his face, and then he went down to one knee on the shining stone, one hand flung back to keep her behind him even as he fell, and where his hand found hers, bare palm to bare palm, the kindling opened between them all at once, like a door thrown wide. She felt everything. She felt the searing ruin of his eyes, as though it were her own, and under it, past it, drowning it, she felt what was in him, and it was not fear for himself, not anger, not regret for a father's name traded away. It was her, it was only her, a terror for her, so total that it had no room in it for anything else, and beneath the terror, holding it up, steady as the stone itself, a love he had never once spoken and had not meant her ever to know. It was too much to hold, and she held it anyway, kneeling on the lit stone with his ruined face turned toward her and his hand still gripping hers, and she understood that every cold thing had been a lie she had told herself, and that she had spent 3 nights hating the one heart in all that keep that had been entirely, hopelessly hers. The knowing came too late to spare either of them. It came anyway, and she would not have given it back. "Drastin," she said. "His name. She had never said it before. Around them, the hollow had gone to chaos. But the stone was still shining, all 7 of its signs alight where no living augur had ever made more than a single mark flicker, and into the uproar, Elder Ormond's old voice rang out hard as struck iron. "Stay your hand, augur." He was at the stone now, and he was not unhappy any longer. He was terrible. "The stone has answered her. 7 signs. Do you dare, before this whole court, to set your moon glass against a woman the 7 stone itself has blessed? Do you dare name cursed what the stone has named its own? The moon will not thank the house that spills that blood." He set himself between the augur and the girl, an old man in gray against a woman in white with murder in her glass, and he did not move, and the whole hollow saw that he did not move, and the great houses, who had watched their prince fail at this stone, and watched a kitchen girl wake it whole, looked at the shining 7 signs and were afraid, and their fear, for once, fell on Elspeth's side. No one would touch her. Not now. Not with the stone lit like a second moon and an old man's curse hanging over the yard. Morwenna's face for one instant showed Elspeth the thing that lived beneath the still water, and it was hatred, and it was fear. Then it was smooth, again as you say. "Elder," she said, "let the augurs consider what has happened here. Let the chosen and her warden withdraw from court, while we take counsel of the moon." She looked at Drosten, kneeling blind and silent on the stone, and she let herself smile once more. "He will want quiet, I think, for his hurts." They carried him out of the hollow. Elspeth would not let go of his hand the whole way, and through it, faint and steady, the kindling carried his pain to her and her presence back to him, so that even in the dark behind his ruined eyes, he would know she had not left him. They gave them Briarfold, which was a Mercy Morwenna dressed as a banishment, and Elspeth did not care in the least what it was called, because it took them out of Ashenreach and set them down at the far, green edge of the world. Before we go on, if this story has taken hold of you, take one moment to follow the channel, so the next one finds its way to you. Now, back to Briarfold. It was a low stone farm high in the fells, half wild, with a stand of white birches and a beck that ran loud over the stones, and it had been, long ago, a holding of the unmarked, one of the few things they had never been able to strip from Drosten because everyone had forgotten it was his. He could not see it. Elspeth described it to him instead: the birches, the water, the way the light came green through the leaves, and she watched his blind face turn toward her voice the way a plant turns toward a window. His eyes were not healed. The healers at the keep had rapped them and shaken their heads, and said the moon caustic had burned what could not be regrown, and that the warden would not see again. He bore it the way he bore everything, without complaint, thanking the servants who guided his hand to a cup, making no sound when he misjudged a step and struck a door frame. But Elspeth felt what he would not say, for the kindling had not closed since the hollow, and she knew the black weight he carried behind his patience, the grief of a soldier gone blind, the certainty that he was now only a burden to a woman he had ruined himself to save. So she made him a thing. It took the old shepherd of Briarfold 3 days to plait, and knot it under her direction, a long light line of corded rope strung waist-high on posts from the door of the house to the beck, to the birches, to the bench in the sun, so that a blind man might walk his own land alone, one hand upon the rope, and need no one. When she set his hand upon it the first time, and told him what it was, he was quiet for so long, she feared she had shamed him. Then he said in a low, rough voice, "No one has ever built me anything before," and he turned his ruined face away, and she pretended not to know that he wept, because the kindling had already told her, and some things a person should be allowed to keep. She learned him, in those days the way she had learned the dark of the vigil, slowly and by touch. She learned that he woke before the sun out of an old soldier's habit and sat listening to the beck until she rose. She learned that he took his tea too hot and would never say so. She learned the particular stillness that meant he was in pain and would not name it, and the smaller, rarer stillness that meant he was, against all his own stubborn expectation, content. And she learned that when she read to him in the evenings some tale out of the one book Briarfold owned, he turned his blind face toward her, as though he could see her after all. And perhaps, through the kindling, in some fashion he did. After that, the days at Briarfold were the best days Elspeth had ever known. There was no court at Briarfold, and no augur, and no eyes at the window counting when she rose and when she slept. For the first time in the whole of her life, the moon could come up over the fells and find her standing in the open, sigils bright along her bare arms, and there was no one it could betray her to, because the one man who might have seen her could not see at all. It was a bitter kind of freedom, bought with his eyes, and she never once forgot the price of it. But it was freedom, and she had never had any before. And some nights she stood out among the birches in the full white light, and let the marks burn and wept for the plain relief of not having to run. She walked him along his rope in the mornings, and named the world for him. She learned the trick of being his eyes, without robbing him of his own feet. They sat in the sun, and he told her of the unmarked as they had been before the unmaking, a proud, quiet house of stone-keepers, and she told him of the scullery, and of Dilly's, and once, haltingly, of the thing she had never told a living soul, that she did not know what she was. That Dilys had bound the sign on her palm when she was a babe, and taught her a sign, seen was a life ended, and that she had spent every night of her life hiding from the moon and did not know why. "You are Sevenkin," Drosten said, as though it were the simplest thing in all the world. "The stone knew you. It has not shone in 100 years, and it shone for you. But I do not know what that means," she said. And he reached out and found her hand, and the kindling warmed between them, and he said, "It means the stone was waiting for you. That is all any of us can say." And she leaned her head against his shoulder in the green light, and for a little while it was enough not to know. It was there, on the bench in the sun, that she cleared away the last of the old hurt. "I heard you," she said, "at your door. The night Merwenna offered you your father's name. I heard her offer it, and I heard you ask her for time, and I thought—" She stopped. "I thought you meant to take it. I thought you would trade me for it." She felt him go still. "Then, quietly I asked her for time, because I had no army and no name and no way under the moon to get you out of that hollow alive," he said. "I needed her to believe I might be bought, so that she would not simply have you done away with before the reading came. Time was the only shield I could put between you and her." He turned his blind face toward her. "I was never going to take it, Elspeth. There was no hour of any night I would have taken it. I only needed her to think that I might." And Elspeth, who had spent 3 days believing the worst of the one man who had earned only the best of her, put her arms around him and held on, and did not try to explain the tears, because through the kindling he already knew. They were still sitting, so when they heard the horse on the fell road and looked up, and saw the Crown's rider coming up toward Briarfold with a sealed letter in his glove. The letter bore the prince's own seal, and Elspeth read it aloud to Drosten in the doorway, with the rider still waiting in the yard, and with every line she read the ground she stood on shifted a little more beneath her feet. The court had turned, that was the sum of it. A kitchen girl waking the stone had been a scandal, but a kitchen girl waking all 7 signs beneath the high moon, a girl the 7 stone itself had lit like a beacon, while an augur cried curse and was struck down by an elder's word, that was something else entirely. The great houses had gone home and talked, and the talk had run one way. If the stone had blessed her, then to have jeered at her was to have jeered at the moon. If she was truly Sevenkin, then the Sevenkin were not the cursed thing the Crown had always named them, for what curse lights the holy stone? There was more, and the letter's careful hand could not quite hide the fright underneath it. If the augurs had been wrong about the Sevenkin for 100 years, then a great many proud houses had spent a week discovering they had jeered at the moon's own blessing in a grey gown, and a great many careers built upon that old wrongness were standing now upon nothing at all. Fear makes people generous in a hurry. The court that had wanted her dead on a cold morning wanted, by the following week, to be able to say that it had always known there was something uncommon in the girl. Morwenna had been confined to her own tower while the elder council considered her conduct. The letter said, as though the confining of Morwenna were a simple thing, as though a woman did not spend 30 years making certain that no tower ever built could hold her 1 hour longer than she wished to be held. Elspeth read that line and felt a small, cold finger touch the back of her neck, and did not yet understand why. And the crown, the letter said, wished to set right the injustice done to the stone chosen. Elspeth turned the page, and her voice failed her, and she read the last of it silently, twice, before she could bring herself to read it aloud. Leoric was offering to wed her. He wrote it handsomely. He wrote of a hasty word, spoken in the shock of the right, of a prince's regret, of the honor. The realm now understood, the stone had done them all. He wrote that a chosen, blessed with 7 signs, belonged beside the throne, as the oldest law had always said, and that he would be proud, now, to give her the place he had once refused. He would make her his queen. He would make the 7 kin honored in the land again. Everything the Hollow had taken from her he laid at her feet in a single page and offered it freely, and all she had to do to have it was come back and take it. For a long moment, Elspeth let herself feel it. She had been a thing spilled that no one wished to touch. She had stooped for dropped fans. She had counted torches in the dark and run from the moon the whole of her life, and here was all of it turned inside out. The crown itself asking her pardon, a throne held out to her, her blood called holy where it had always been called filth. She was 22 years old, and she had never once in all of them been wanted out loud, and now a prince had written it on paper with his own seal. She thought of the woman who had let a fan fall so that a scullion must stoop for it, curtsying now to a queen. She thought of the whole cold court parting before her. The whispers turned to bows, her blood named holy, in the very hall where it had been named filth. She thought of what it would mean for the others too, the hidden ones, the children yet to be born with the moon in their skin, if the last of the 7 kin sat crowned beside the throne and made their name a blessing again instead of a sentence of death. It was not a small thing to want, it was, she told herself, the largest and the best thing she had ever been offered, and it would be a kind of cowardice to refuse it out of some private softness of the heart. Joy came up in her sharp and sweet and dizzying, and then she felt, through the kindling, the change in the man beside her. She had forgotten, for one moment, that Drostan could hear every word she read. She turned to him, the letter still in her hand, and she saw that his blind face had gone very carefully. Still, the way it went still when he was hiding a wound, and through the kindling quiet and terrible, she felt him begin, very gently, to let her go. She had felt him take a blow of white fire without a sound. She had felt him bear the loss of his sight without one word of complaint. And now she felt him do the hardest thing she had yet known him to do, which was to stand quietly at her side and unclasp his own heart from hers, finger by finger, so that she might walk away toward the crown, unburdened by the knowing that it broke him. He would not even let her feel the whole of it. He was trying to spare her that too. It was the most loving thing anyone had ever done to her, and it made her want to weep, or to strike him, or both at once. She folded the letter along its crease and set it on the table beside the cold hearth, and she did not answer the writer that night, and she did not look again at the man beside her, because if she looked at him she would say something, and she did not yet know what the something was. Outside the fells went dark, and the moon came up over Briarfold, and for once she did not care in the least who saw her shine. He waited until the rider had been fed and sent to the barn for the night, and the fire was low, and Elspeth had gone quiet, before he said the thing she had felt him building toward all evening. "You should take it," said Drosten. She had known that it was coming, and still it landed like a stone. She said nothing. "You should take it," he said again more steadily, as though saying it twice made it a thing he could bear. Listen to me, Elsbeth. You are born to more than this. You are the last of a holy line, and the stone has named you, and a prince is offering you a throne, and the safety of your whole blood along with it. He is offering to make the seven kin honored again. Do you understand what that is worth? Not for you alone, for every soul who ever had to hide what you hid. He wants me now that the stone has made me safe to want, she said. He did not want me in the hollow. He called me a creature to a gold-haired lady on a stair. He was a fool in the hollow, said Drostan. Men are fools when they are afraid of being laughed at. He is offering to unmake the wrong now, and it is a wrong worth unmaking, whatever manner of man it is who offers it. You would not truly be marrying Leoric, Elspeth. You would be marrying a throne, and a throne can do good that a hill farm never can. You could open the old doors, you could call the hidden ones out of their dark corners and tell them the moon does not want them dead. There is no one else living who could do that, only you. And what of you? She said. I am a blind and nameless man on a hill farm, he said simply. I cannot give you a throne. I cannot give you my name, for I have none left to give. I cannot even give you my eyes to look upon you with. He turned his ruined face toward the fire. The marriage was law and duty, and never once your choosing. It can be undone. Ormond will undo it with a word, now that the court has turned. You would walk into that hollow, a free woman, and take the crown, and no one living could say that you had not earned it 100 times over. I have thought it through, he said, and she could hear that he had lain awake building this, the way he built everything, carefully, to last. You will say that you do not want a crown, but you have never once had the chance to want anything, Elspeth. You were given to a scullery before you could walk, and taught to want nothing louder than getting through the day. Let yourself want this. Let yourself have one thing that the whole world agrees you have earned. Do not throw it away on a farm and a broken man, because I am the first person who was ever kind to you. Kindness is a low bar. You deserve the high one. He drew a breath. I would see you safe and honored and a queen. That is the last thing left that I can do for you, and I am asking you to let me do it. And there it was, the whole shape of him, laid bare in the firelight. She saw it all now, laid out, end to end. The night on the high moon eve, when he had refused her and she had gone away, certain he did not want her, when in truth he had refused, because he would not let her spend herself on a doomed man out of fear. The torch moved aside in silence, so that she might hide a secret he had never once asked her to explain. The time begged of Morwenna, which she had taken for the first step of a betrayal, and which had been a blind man's only way of buying a stranger a few more days of life. Every wall he had ever set between them, she had read as coldness, and every single one of them had been built of the same stubborn, ruinous tenderness, a man so certain that he was worth nothing at all, that he could only love by giving the beloved away. You stubborn man, she said, and her voice was shaking now, not with fear, but with a rising fury. You would hand me to the prince who called me a creature. You would send me back to the crown that burned your father's name off your skin, and you would call it a gift. I would send you to safety, he said. You would send me away from you, she said, and think it the same thing. I would rather have you blind and nameless on this hill than see you sit crowned in that hollow with the whole realm bowing, and not one of them, the man who moved a torch in the dark for a stranger. Do you hear me? There is no throne in all the world worth the price you are asking me to pay for it, and the price you are naming is you. I cannot let you throw yourself away on me, he said, and his voice broke on it at the last. That, she said, is not your choice to make. It is mine, and you will not steal it from me by being noble at me until I give in. He had no answer for that. And Elspeth, looking at him in the firelight, blind and unbreakable and breaking, understood that she was not going to argue him out of it in a night, because he did not believe, in the deep foundation of himself, that he was a thing worth choosing. More than 20 years of being the unmarked had taught him that, and no letter of hers, and no fury either, was going to unteach it before morning, so she did not argue further. She said quietly, "I will give you my answer in the morning," and she let him think that he had won, because it was easier than watching him brace himself against the truth. She sat by the low fire the whole night through, as she had said she would, but not to weigh his offer, for there was nothing in it that needed weighing. She sat, and she watched him sleep at last in the chair across from her, his ruined face gone, soft and young in the firelight, and she made herself a promise in the place where other women made plans. She would not be given away. Not to a prince, not to a crown, not by the man himself, in the name of her own good. She had been handed from one keeping to another the whole of her life, a babe passed out through the fires, a child bound and hidden, a bride bestowed by a law. In the morning, for the first time in all of it, she would do the choosing, herself. And far off at Ashenreach in a tower, she was not confined to nearly so well as the letter had claimed. The High Augur Morwenna was making a plan of her own, for she had understood, as Drosten in his grief had not, exactly what it would come to mean if the last of the Sevenkin were allowed to live long enough to be loved. Morwenna came to Briarfold in the grey before dawn, and she did not come alone, and she did not come to talk. Elspeth was awake to see them ride up, 3 horses out of the mist, because she had not slept, and she was already on her feet at the window when she understood what the grey shapes were. She woke the old shepherd. And then she went to wake Drosten, and found him already sitting up in the dark, his blind face turned toward the yard. "They are here," he said. "I heard the horses." Then, low and urgent, feeling for her hand, "Elspeth, whatever happens now, you take the fell path behind the birches and you run, and you do not stop, and you do not come back, for me. Promise me that." "I will not," she said. "Elspeth." "No," she said. "I have run from things the whole of my life. I am done with running." Morwenna did not trouble herself with the door. She stood in the yard in the grey light, and her 2 men spread wide, with drawn steel, and she called up to the house in her poured voice, gone thin now with something that was almost desperation. "Give her to me, Warden, and you may keep your farm and your ruined eyes, and your life. The council will believe, whatever I tell it to believe. It always has. But the girl cannot live. You, of all men, should understand that. Your house died once already, to keep her line alive. Do not make it so that they died for nothing." Elspeth went cold. What did she mean by that? What did she mean? His house died to keep her line alive. But Drosten was already moving, up and blind and putting himself between Elspeth and the door, as he had put himself between her and the fire, and Morwenna, out of patience at the last, lifted her hand, and in it was the last of her cruel moonglass, catching the first grey light, and she drew back her arm to break it against the threshold where Elspeth stood. And Elspeth, seeing the man she loved stand blind, and swaying between her and her own death for the second time, felt something in her simply break open. The 7th sign on her palm flared, and then all 7 signs, up her arms and across her whole self, brighter than they had ever burned, brighter than the high moon itself, and the light of them poured out of her and into the darkness where Drosten stood, into the ruin behind his eyes, into the very man. The kindling did not merely open this time. It caught the way a banked fire catches when the wind at last reaches it, all 7 signs answering at once between them, and the light of them was so much and so true that it went into the very places the moon caustic had burned, and it burned them clean, and it made them new. Drosten drew a breath, like a man surfacing from deep water, and he opened his eyes, and he saw. He saw the grey dawn, and the white birches, and the moon-glass drawn back in Morwenna's hand, and he saw, before anyone else in that yard understood what had changed, the whole of it plain before him. He was across the threshold before Morwenna could throw, and he caught her wrist in one scarred hand, and the moon glass fell from her fingers and broke harmless on the stones of the yard where its cold fire found nothing living to reach, and it was over that quickly. It was Elder Ormond who came up the fell road as the sun cleared the ridge, with the elder council behind him and the crown's own guard, for the crown's rider had ridden out in the small hours, not homeward at all but down the fell to fetch them, because Elsbeth, sitting her sleepless watch, had trusted the cold that had touched the back of her neck and sent him. They found the high augur held fast in a blind man's grip that was no longer blind, and they found the last of her monglass broken upon the stones, and they found a great deal more than that besides, because Dilys had come up the road with them. The old kitchen woman climbed down off the cart and crossed the yard, and took Elsbeth's face in her two flower-worn hands and wept, and then, at last, where it was safe to, she told the whole of it before them all. The seventh sign, Dilys said, was the sign of the kindling itself, the last and the greatest of the 7 gifts of the Sevenkin, the one that let true love be seen and known, and never counterfeited. And it was for that sign above all the others that the crown had set itself, 100 years past, to drive the Sevenkin from the world, and had struck that 7th sign from the face of the 7 stone so that it might be forgotten forever, for a king who cannot lie to the heart is a king who cannot be ruled by those who lie for him. But a hunted people do not die all in a day. A remnant of them lived on in hiding, run down a little further with every passing year, until at last there was but a single child of that blood left in all the world to find. And the keeping of the 7th sign, its guarding, its memory, had belonged since the first snows to one house alone, the wardens of the stone, the unmarked Drostan's house. They had not been unmade for a small treason, Dilys said. They had been unmade because, when the crown's men came at last for the final 7kin child, a babe not 1 season old, it was the old warden, Drostan's own father, who took the child up in the dark and carried her away into the night, and gave her into the hands of a young kitchen maid he trusted, and bade her raise the child hidden, and bind the telling sign upon her palm, and never once let the moon reveal her until the day the stone should wake again. He paid for it, with his name, and his house, and his life. His young son paid for it too, and carried the mark of that night ever after. And the maid carried the child down into the scullery of Ashenreach, and raised her there as her own, and bound her palm, and taught her to fear the moon, and loved her, the heavens knew, better than her own life. Dilys looked at Elspeth through her tears. "You are the child," she said, "and he," and she turned to Drostan, "he was the boy. His father died to save you before either one of you could walk. And all these years you have been under the one roof, and never knew that his house was broken, keeping you alive, and that the sign upon your hand was the very thing his blood was sworn to guard. The stone did not wake for a stranger child. It woke for the one soul in all the world that the last warden gave everything he had to save." The yard was very quiet. Elsbeth looked at Drostan, and Drostan looked back at her with the eyes she had given him, and neither of them could find a word that was big enough, so they did not try to find one. They took Morwenna down the fell road in irons, and the whole rotten frame she had built her life upon went down the road with her, for a lie 100 years old cannot go on standing in the same yard as 7 lit signs. They went back to Ashenreach in the spring. Elspeth had thought that she would feel something, riding back in through the gates that had once been the whole of her cruel world. She felt almost nothing. The keep was only stones now, and the court that came out to gape at her was only frightened people who had chosen the wrong side and knew it. Leoric was to be married that very day, as it happened, to the gold-haired lady he had settled on when a scullion would not do, and the court had gathered in the hollow for the wedding at the very foot of the stone. Elspeth walked in on Drostan's arm, and the whispering stopped. They came in, restored, the both of them. The warden's name had been spoken again in the elder council and struck back onto the rolls, and his house named at last for what it had always been, the keepers of the 7th sign. And beside him walked the last of the 7kin, no longer hooded, no longer hidden. The 7 signs quiet now beneath her skin, but known to every soul in that hollow, and the light that had once damned her had made her, in the eyes of the whole realm, something very near to holy. They walked the length of the hollow past faces that had jeered and whispered a season before, and not one of those faces was laughing now. Leoric came to her at the foot of the stone, leaving his bride standing to do it, and he bowed a little lower than a prince has any need to bow, and there was something in his handsome face that had not been there before, which was the full understanding of exactly what he had thrown away in the shock of a right when he could not bear to be laughed at. "My lady," he said. He had trouble with the words. "I hope that you are. I hope that you have found happiness." "I have," Elsbeth said, and she was pleasant, and she was cool, and she did not offer him one thing more than that. She felt Drostan's hand settle warm over hers, and through the kindling, quiet and steady and wholly hers, his whole heart, and she found that she had no unkindness in her to spare for Leoric, and no want of him either. He had been the wrong door all along. She had only had to be thrown through it to find the right one standing open on the other side. They did not stay for the wedding. They had a farm up in the fells with a rope strung waist-high from the door to the beck, and white birches coming into their leaf, and neither of them had any more use for that hollow than the hollow had ever had for them. 2 people the world had tried to erase, a girl it would not look at, and a man it had unmade. And out of the whole wide world they had chosen in the end to be truly seen by each other, and that was the one blessing no crown had ever held in its gift to give. I have wondered since whether Drosten was right to try to give her away, to send her toward the crown and the safety and the throne, because he could not make himself believe he was a thing worth choosing. Was it the last selfless act of a good man? Or was it one selflessness too many? The kind that would have cost them both everything they had. Tell me what you think in the comments below. I would truly like to know. And I will see you again soon for another story.